The difference between the viewer and the player has changed quite drastically in the last few years. For example, playing video games has just simply evolved over the last few years from different consoles, different generations, and games aren't just simply limited to that of things like Pong, Donkey Kong, or the classic Super Mario. But the story that they tell and the connections that the player and the game have is a lot more impactful than what can be seen in the cinematic experience. One of the great examples of this is the now closed Telltale Games developers. Now, they made games where they were basically the choose your own adventure medium, but the thing that Telltale does better than the old choose your own books and the Netflix film Bandersnatch is that they made you attached to the characters within the story, and they made your choices matter. The first major game that brought Telltale as a company into the mainstream was the episodic series The Walking Dead. Now, when I first played this game, I was running off the excitement of playing a game that at the time I thought was closely connected with the TV show and the comic books. But what I experienced was a unique and powerful new way of telling story that I had never experienced in my life as a player. The connections I felt with the character of Clementine was powerful. While playing the game as a character named Lee, I was forced in a situation where I had to look after Clementine no matter what. And to this point, as the player, I myself felt like I was in Lee's shoes, and all the character development that went on throughout the game just kept me emotionally hooked as an individual. Now, I must give a spoiler warning here, but it does help to explain more of what I mean by this. The most impactful connection between the player, myself, and the game was the last scene in The Walking Dead Season 1 where Lee has to say goodbye to Clementine as he is dying. The death of the character is impactful and emotional. Clementine is a 10-year-old girl, and you have to choose what Lee's last words are to her, and your choice of words will not only affect her, but will affect her character development not just through the ending, but through multiple game stories that take place after the game. And the most hardest and most heart-wrenching scene is you, as the player, have to tell Clementine to kill Lee, who, at this point through the game, has become a father figure to her, and she looks up to him. And she will always remember him as the person who helped her survive. And you have choices in your last words that will affect her, like if you should tell her to stay away from the cities, don't trust people, stay together as a group. These three choices drastically affect the other games in the series.
Don't be afraid.
Through this cause of effect that was mentioned in the 2009 article called In the Frame of Magic Circle, where it's mentioned that while it may be helpful to consider that there is an invisible boundary making game space from normal space, that line has already been breached, if it was ever there to start with. My point is not to contend that such boundaries are necessary or unnecessary, but instead to point to the most important boundary makers for games, their rules. Rules keep a game distinct from other games as well as other paths to life. And it's through this, with the connection of this boundary, that the Walking Dead game breaks away this boundary of reality and sucks you in as a player and makes you feel like an important role. And while in later games continuing these connections, you play Clementine as she grows from the young 10-year-old girl into the woman that she becomes, and it's an emotional roller coaster not just for the characters in the game, but for the player themselves.
This place has too much excitement.
Okay, so now that I've given an example of how being a player can affect an individual, I'd like to now discuss what it means to be a viewer. The way mediums like television, movies, has changed quite drastically over the past few years. With the birth of streaming services such as Netflix, Stan and Foxtel, comes the death of the old video rental store. But the one form of viewing that is still quite powerful is the cinematic experience. As quoted by the Handbook of Media Audiences, the extreme contrast between the darkness in the auditorium and the brilliance of the shifting patterns of lights and shades on the screen helped promote the illusion of virtuous separation. Just like being a player, being a viewer is also a sort of way to escape the everyday and see new sights, worlds, and people. The one thing that I enjoy most in movies is the sense of world building. Films like Alita Battle Angel, Blade Runner and its sequel 2049, and the epic James Cameron classic Avatar. I love watching these movies that build worlds that could be very close to our own or far different in space and time.
All of time and space, everything that ever happened or ever will. Where do you want to start?
But as I one day would like to be an actor, I mainly, as a viewer, like to watch films where you can see an actor is really giving it their all. Filth, starring James McAvoy, is a no-holds-barred controversial tale of a corrupt police officer and how, as an individual, his life and everything he knows slowly starts to fall apart. Now, we have mainly been talking about movie-wise so far, so let's delve into the realm of television. Now, as an individual who watches quite a lot of television in their spare time, I cannot stand free-to-air TV. It represents everything I hate about TV as a medium. Watching movies on TV with ad breaks, it's not the right way to watch things. Me as an individual, I mainly try to stick to watching shows that give a more cinematic experience and are well made, and they could pass as a film experience. Shows like Game of Thrones, Westworld, American Horror Stories, Breaking Bad, and the example that I'd like to go into in more depth, Doctor Who. A great evolution of a show, you may say, but Doctor Who changes over the seasons. And what's more controversially, as an example I'd like to use, is the newest season of Doctor Who. While I love the stories that Doctor Who used to tell during the David Tennant, Matt Smith, and Peter Capaldi era, I'm absolutely in love with the cinematography on display in the newer season. Now, while the stories may not be as well written or well thought out, I'm always constantly drawn into the new, vibrant worlds they show and Jodie Whittaker's massive on-screen appearance. Things like that help to draw me in as an audience and believe the fundamentalities of this world. And shows such as Broadchurch, which is also made by the new team at Doctor Who, I was hooked in that show because I wanted to know everything about the people in the town and the mystery and who killed off the main child, and the mystery just drew through the entire show into 2 exciting seasons and a 3rd surprising but well-suited season. Now, as a viewer, these are kind of not really good examples, but they give us interesting stories and sometimes a little element of horror. So I do enjoy watching the occasional Stephen King, or as mentioned previously, American Horror Story, because that feeds in to what I like about stories. I like mysteries. And isn't that the one thing we as people like most? We love a good story. We love a good mystery. And we love, even more than that, the cinematic experience.